Hello everyone, welcome to the Procuratie, welcome to SMAC. I'm one of the 4 co-founders of SMAC San Marco Art Center, which is a new institution that opened yesterday. I hope many of you were here already. And as you can see, we're starting with a very strong program, doing something with the world around. SMAC is a new institution in town. It's a brand new initiative, really born out of the will to give a Kunsthalle to the city of Venice. I think Venice, despite its really rich cultural landscape, does not have an independent platform that kind of programs across all of visual culture. So we're going to do architecture, art, design, fashion, and really try to bring great content, and content that is overlooked, I think. The opening shows are quite representative. One show is Harry Seidler, an Australian architect who's not as well known outside of Australia as he should be, but we try to make an exhibition that is as much about his life as it is about his architecture and about his artist collaborations, his life being very much a kind of mirror of the 20th century. So it's really approachable for, you know, lovers of architecture, but also just people who are interested in a great story that is very representative of things, of events of the 20th century. Seidler was a Jew who fled Vienna in '38, and then was lucky enough to study under Gropius Albers, worked for Breuer Niemeyer, and then kind of brought modernism to Australia. So this idea of, you know, the migration of ideas through the displacement of people. And the other show is a monographic show of Jung Yoon Sun, which is a Korean female landscape architect who's in her 80s. She was here yesterday, she's phenomenal. And again, a field that is kind of a little bit on the periphery and should become more and more relevant. I think the Korean example of what the government did there in the 50s already is kind of phenomenal, because they started proper training programs for landscape architects after the country was heavily deforested and ruined by the war. And Jung Yoon Sun is one of the first people who trained in that discipline. And then they also put through regulation where proportions of housing buildings had to kind of be allocated to landscape and gardening, something that we're probably going to start doing now here, but we don't have the people trained, etc. So I do think it's kind of an inspirational story as well. We're going to be quite dynamic and have lots of shows on, so 3 to 4 a year. These shows are only on for 3 months. And then in September, we're going to open a show on quantum physics curated by Daniel Birnbaum. And that's as far as we've announced for now. But I hope after this, you just go back to where you came in, go to the second floor and take a quick look. And we're really excited to welcome you in future years, hopefully with equally exciting programming. I very quickly wanted to say something about the building. So the building, when we had this idea for Kunsthalle in Venice, we weren't really thinking of 2,000 square meters in Piazza San Marco, restored by David Chipperfield. So we got insanely lucky to find this building, which was restored by Generali, the biggest insurance company in Italy, with Chipperfield with such care. And these spaces are just perfect because they have the highest level of infrastructure, so we can kind of have any kind of lawns, but they're incredibly beautiful. You can hang directly on the walls, so it's just a stroke of luck. And we have amazing neighbors in the form of the Human Safety Net upstairs, which is Generali's foundation that does great humanitarian work. And Alexia will say a couple of words about that. Alexia Borro, the director. I finally just wanted to quickly thank Beatrice, Galilee, and the whole team of the world around, because, you know, being a brand new institution, you really rely, I guess, on the belief of partners, supporters, other people that you can actually do it and pull it off. You know, nobody's heard of SMAC until about 3 weeks ago when we released our press release. And the world around, amongst also partners of the exhibition downstairs, really kind of put that trust in us and believed in us. And so we're super happy because we think what you do is great. And so we're happy to be part of that. Thank you.
I put you because the light. Thank you very much for being here. It's such a pleasure to welcome you to the Procuratie, and I'm very happy that SMAC opened yesterday on the second floor. The third floor of the Procuratie is the home of the Human Safety Net, which is the Generali Foundation, born in 2017, and we do social inclusion all around the world. The foundation is in 25 different countries, and we support vulnerable people, and we try to help them to find a better chance in life. So we focus on 2 different programs: family, vulnerable family with kids 06, and refugees. So with NGOs all around the world, we create programs, parenting program, mentoring program, many different kind of activities in order to give people the instruments that they can use to change their life and the life of their communities, family and communities. So I am very happy that today we do this event with the World Around because it's about accessibility of architecture, accessible architecture. And it's exactly what we are trying to do here. You know, this building is from the 16th century and was completely restored by David Chipperfield, who was here last night. Because Generali wanted to have a home for its foundation, and also because this building was closed for 30 years, and finally was given back to the community, and also not only the Venice community, but the community of the world. And so it's such a pleasure to have you here, because what we want to do is to bring the world around here to the Procuratie and to invite people to discover this place as a hub for social innovation, where different disciplines, different minds can come together and discuss about the urgent matters of our time. So thank you again. Please, if you have time, visit the space. There is a wonderful enfilado vaches that you already seen, I think. But also we have other experiences that you can do later. So thank you again. Please, if you want to know more about the Human Safety Net, you can find everything online, because we believe that we are a movement of people helping people, and every one of us can do a little change. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Beatrice Galilee. I'm the founder and director of The World Around, and welcome to The World Around on-site Venice. It's so lovely to see everybody this morning. The World Around, if you're new to us, is a non-profit curatorial platform to advance ideas in contemporary global architecture. This is our first event under the auspices of On-Site. We organize usually events in collaboration with sort of large institutions such as MoMA, the Guggenheim, Design Museum, and others. And you can find an archive of previous events on our website. We'd love you to get to know our work. We also organize a program called the Young Climate Prize, which is a mentorship and awards program for young people under the age of 25. So I encourage you to get to know our work online. Before we start, I'd really like to thank our board of directors, our board of advisors who are here today, and also our global cultural partner, Fondation Cartier, who are so pleased to be here in Venice with, our partners Unifor and Molteni, and all of our Circles members and everyone here today for being part of this event. So without further ado, the process is going to be, we're going to hear from people who are on site in Venice, as the name may suggest, and all of the people who are going to be on stage today are participants in the Biennale, or are people who have had strong links to the Biennale and also strong links to the world around. And in the Venn diagram are people who reply to my messages very quickly and agree to sort of do things like this. So if everyone could come on stage and take a seat, I'll introduce everybody and we'll get going. So come on stage, everybody. Okay. Oh, hey, look who showed up. I know it's very early. I have done things at 7:30, so for me, this is, everyone got a lie-in. Okay, so I want to start by asking the people who are showing in the national pavilions, because I think we'll start with national pavilions, and then we'll go into the people that are showing inside the main exhibition. So maybe I'll start actually with Bas, who is the artist and not commissioner of the Belgian pavilion, but the curator. So we were able to see your pavilion yesterday, and it would be great if you could just explain a little bit about your response to the brief. Why did you explain what you did, and also why are you doing it right now, today?
Hello, everybody. I'm a landscape architect, so I make landscapes. And I have this discussion with Stefano Mancuso, that you might know, the famous neurobiologist, on the intelligence of plants. And because we make landscapes in a kind of dumb way. While we know that there's an intelligence of plants that we have a hard time to grasp, we think like animals, so we have a hard time understanding how plants function. And so I've been having this discussion with him and trying to make new types of landscapes. And when the Belgian pavilion came out with a brief for the Biennale of Architecture, I thought, that building, it's also a strange building, because it's an empty shell, every year used to show art, to show architecture. Can we not think of the building as a microclimate? And so what we did is we brought a landscape inside the building. We planted 400 plants inside the core of the building. We follow very precisely with the latest technology what these plants think is a difficult word, I know, but what these plants feel, what they need. And it's actually the plants that are asking for rain when they need it, they ask for light when they need it, and they ask for ventilation. So the plants are operating the building and produce a microclimate. And so what we're suggesting is that basically to rethink architecture. Architecture has always been about survival, about protecting us from the rain, from the wind, except that now we spend 80% of our times in spaces that are cut off from the biosphere that allows life. So can we rethink the building as a biosphere? Can we bring plants inside, and can we have plants operate the building? This is a prototype, it's a small pavilion, but I think at the scale of an airport, of a hospital, this could really change the relationship between architecture and nature, and that's really what we're proposing.
Eva Frank, who's the, again, commissioner, curator of Catalan Pavilion, and also participating in the general exhibition. So when I invited Eva, you were like, which thing do you want me to talk about? But actually, I would like you to talk about what exactly you curated for the Pavilion Catalonia, and why you did it now. Why is it that now is the time for your exhibition?
I didn't do this project alone. It was with Mireia Luzárraga and Alejandro Muiño. We have been the curators, designers, and community agitators, if you want, of a project that starts from a premise. The United Nations has said that the climate crisis is in fact a water crisis, that it is in rivers, in dams, in wetlands, in seas, where in fact we are going to be fighting the battle of, if you want, survival of this planet. And so if we actually try to think that, and someone already said many years ago, everything is architecture, I think perhaps it's time to say that all architecture is water architecture. As architects, we build with water, either if it is just to configure the servers that are going to render some images of speculative thinking, or to produce materials, or to assemble them. And so from that relationship, literally of just instrumentalization of water, to the way in which we have contributed to the transformation of territories and lands, and the displacement of habitats that actually live with water, we have had a total disrespect for water bodies. And so the project starts from the premise that we have to rethink our relationship with water. And so we have done an almost 1 year long process of working with different communities, anchored in the different areas of the Catalan territory, and also Valencia and the Balearic Islands, having a series of workshops. We call them future laboratories, where we invited people related to earth, meaning people who are fishermen, agriculture people, scientists, artists, biologists, architects, also obviously activists and politicians, to try to identify what are their conflicts around the theme of water. And of course, sometimes we would be in a panel like this, a bit more of a circle, and they would say, my conflict with water, it's you. Because of course, we are constantly trying to avoid the conflict of bringing different disciplines and different stakeholders within a specific setting. And in that process, we identified, as you said, Venn diagrams, spaces where problematics could intersect, and we as architects could then intervene to try to perhaps make certain propositions. So within this process of these future laboratories, then we identified certain briefs in which then we materialized proposals for what we call a hopeful future. And in that process, last time I was in the World Around, I was talking about translation. And I do believe very much in the power of words in shaping not only the way in which we relate to each other and we communicate, but also the way we think. So we did a publication that is called 100 Words for Water, in which we ask individuals across the world to contribute a word for this vocabulary. Some of them are actually in this room. And it has been an incredible journey to start to redefine the way in which our vocabulary in relationship with water that is mostly extractivist, consumerist-based, is starting to multiply with a set of conversations that go from the legal to the scientific to the poetic. And that has been a really incredible journey that we believe it is urgent and should be happening now.
Thank you, Eva. So Stephen and Malika, you are participants in the US pavilion. Stephen Burks and Malika of Stephen Burks Man-Made, based in Brooklyn, New York. You responded to a brief of Porch, which is the overall theme of the US pavilion. And I really was actually very moved to see your contribution, which is so embedded in process and culture and community. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about your response to Porch and why you responded with, well, tell us what you did and how that connects to today.
Sure. I want to thank Bee and the World Around for having us and for getting us all here by 9 o'clock. I think that's remarkable. We have to say that we are 1/3 of a curatorial design team that also includes, obviously, the architect Marlon Blackwell and the landscape architecture team, 10 by 10, also with
Dirt Studio.
Dirt Studio. And it's significant because this is the first time the US Pavilion has been represented by an architecture firm from the South and by a collective from the South. Our brief, or let's say the theme of the project, Porch and Architecture of Generosity, speaks to that space that is the mediator between public and private. But from our point of view, it also speaks to the complicated history of the porch as a site of surveillance, et cetera, for underprivileged, underserved communities in America, let's say, marginalized communities. So our perspective has always been to seek innovation through a workshop-based practice that takes us to where the making is happening. And we started this concept of objects of belonging, which is the curatorial project that we're presenting, around looking at the porch from the perspective of belonging, and belonging coming from the Bell Hooks book, Belonging.
Belonging, a culture of place, where she's writing about what it means to be a part of a community, what does it mean to invite someone into a community, and what do we define as home. I think Bell Hooks has been very meaningful in our practice, but even more so now, given the cultural and political climate that we're in the US, really asking, what do we consider as home, who's allowed in our home. And so I think it's very meaningful right now, being at the pavilion and making this statement about belonging, the idea that we all belong.
So we're looking at the porch as a site of creativity, a site of diversity, of course, and a site of resistance in many ways. And so in order to do that, we've brought together 7 or 8 projects of our own that have worked with collaborators in the South specifically around, let's say, the typologies of the porch. So we're, of that range of projects, we're presenting our Crafting Diversity project with Berea College from Berea, Kentucky, where we're looking at 2 pieces in particular, the broom thing, which is a kind of ambient object that is focused on broom making, and the spruce, which is a kind of teaching tool around wood and wood fabrication. Probably the most exciting project we're presenting is a collaboration with the Gee's Bend Quilters in Gee's Bend, Alabama. This is a community that I've wanted to collaborate with for years. Many of you may know our work from around the world, but we've done very little in our own communities in America. And Gee's Bend in a small town called Boykin, Alabama, in a kind of cut-off section of, well, let's say a cul-de-sac of the Alabama River, a very poor community that since, I guess, over a century has been making the most beautiful abstract quilts from various materials that were available to them. For our project, we decided to collaborate with the Italian fabric house Dedar, which many of you may know, and we shipped, I don't know, maybe $10,000 worth of silk and velvets and I don't know, linens to Alabama, and the quilters there developed 10 unique works of art, let's say, which are also presented in the pavilion. Thinking about architecture in the broadest sense and expanding this idea of the built environment, we're really grateful to Peter McKeith, Dean Peter McKeith at the University of Arkansas, for including our work and looking at the importance of the porch as a site of generosity from, let's say, the objects that we inhabit our rooms with, but then all the way to something like 54 different architectural projects that were invited from around the country through an open call.
I think that's a good sum up. Thank you.
Congratulations, both of you. It's a beautiful project. Aric, you're as the director of the New Institute, commissioner of the Netherlands Pavilion, which I guess you've been doing for the last couple of years. Could you explain a little bit about the brief that you set this year, or the response from this year's exhibitors?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll maybe just skip to the response. Bas rightly pointed out that we are all animals, and Eva reminded us that we are animals that tend to like conflict a lot. And in some ways, that's what the pavilion responds to. It's essentially an alternative sports bar. But it's one that's sort of building on the idea that in the sort of binary oppositional ways in which we as humans tend to think, there are perhaps other ways of rethinking how we create and construct these social relationships that result in these conflicts through the medium of sports. So it's curated by what's called Sidelined, a space for rethinking togetherness, and it's curated by Amanda Panatti, featuring Gabriel Fontana, who's a social and speculative designer. Well, more than speculative, because he actually does it. Who over the past few years has developed these really brilliant sort of variations on team sports. I'm grossly simplifying right now, but he has one called Multiform. It's a 3-team football game in which at various points the referee blows the whistles, and then the players change their uniforms and switch sides. Also multiform, based on this observation that we have different sizes for fields, whether you're for women or for men. And so the field lines are then projected onto the floor, and they shapeshift throughout the game, creating a kind of solidarity between the opposing teams who are now fighting against the field itself. And then he developed a new one, a third one called Anonymous Allyship, which he's been practicing and playing with groups of local Venetians over the past few months at the football club just past the Giardini called it's called Anonymous Allyship. And basically you don't know which team everyone is on. You know which team you're on because there's a number sort of printed in the inside of your jersey, but the idea is as you're playing you figure out who's on whose side. These are really sort of you're all chuckling. That's really good because these are really sort of fun, playful games. But there is a lot of there's a lot to learn from them, because we keep talking about how we need to make radical changes. We need to rethink everything. These are all structural issues, and what Gabriel does is show some ways in which we can actually reconfigure these structures in order to change social relationships, to sort of facilitate more and different forms of empathy and modes of solidarity, and to do it in a way that's fun, because I think we could all use a little fun right now.
So I want to move on to some of the exhibitors in the main show, and Tosin Oshinowo from Lagos, former participant in the World Around, you participated with a project of your own making, your own research that you've been working on for quite some time, many years, and I would love to hear about the research and the way that you presented it and why you felt like now was the time and this was the show to share it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to this. So it's a very personal project. I grew up in Lagos. I was born in Nigeria, and I feel very strongly about the reality of our existence. You grew up in a place where we were having a conversation yesterday where things don't work, but things still work. And in particular, when we start to think about the climate and the challenges that we face today, I don't know if many people know that Africa contributes very little to global carbon. In 2023, Africa contributed 3.75% to global carbon, which is absolutely nothing. We have 17% of the world's population, and we will have the youngest population in the world by 2050. 70% of the world's population will live in cities. What does that mean for the African city of the future, especially in a place where, with strained economic realities, we are not able to produce or provide the same physical infrastructure as the rest of the world? And so a lot of the research I've been doing has been looking into what has worked and why does it work? And why are we able to achieve so much with less? And an entry point into this idea of understanding the urbanism has come from the informal market structures that exist in West African cities. And I've been doing research into this, and for the biennial here, I'm showcasing 3 markets that are self-governed, bottom-down or bottom-up, as opposed to top-down markets. They exist in the city unplanned. They are working at a very sophisticated mass, moving numbers that are astronomical. We have a computer village which on average daily makes $5.4 million in sales, with no building infrastructure. It's fascinating. But the 3 markets that I've shown, apart from working with this sophistication, we also are dealing with the reality of converting global north waste, reappropriating and extending life, where we have redundancy that is built in for clothes, electronics, and cars. These are now being sold to the global south, being reappropriated, given new life, extending and adding value to a populace who can only afford, products in this realm. So, it's really fascinating to see, what's being achieved, in terms of circularity, but also in terms of an urbanism that isn't a top-down, and the reality of what it means for the African city potentially for the future.
Congratulations, Tosin.
Thank you.
And then of the last of our exhibitors, María, your project Communal is something that we've seen thrive and flourish over the last years, and it was so exciting to learn that you're part of this year's show, and I know that this is a big project that you've been working on. It would be great for you to share a little bit about the history of you and your practice, and also what you're showing in this year's curatorial.
Thank you for this invitation. It's always a pleasure to come and talk. A little bit of context: we are an NGO in Colombia, and our work is a dialogue between 2 passions. One is education, the love for practical and community construction processes, to understand architecture and everything around it as a collective construction process, and to embody all learnings. And our classrooms are the territories and ecosystems of different areas in Colombia. So the iteration of our work that we're presenting here, it's a combination of many beautiful things that we are actually very overwhelmed with the fact that we got a space to explore in this madness of a deadline and these understandings of architecture and La Biennale, which is, of course, our first time here. One of the many things that we keep protecting is this methodologies of work in originally settlements, which are called mingas, which is collective constructions, what we call methodologies, but it's the original ways of building settlements. And we have the blessing of working with ancestral cultures, not seeing ancestrality as this romantic past, but as this very present fight, resilience of maintaining a relationship between the human body and the living systems, living cycles of the materials. So we started to understand the importance of seeing architectures as weaving infrastructures, as a way of regenerating socially, cultural, and ecosystem-wise our webs in the different scenarios wherever we land. We have an educational centers in the outside of Bogota where we have the prototype of different buildings, building techniques, and we accompany collective processes in the indigenous communities. In these indigenous communities, we've learned how important is the raw material, the fibers. You know, we started with earth. Earth was our main door to all this path, but then we moved into woods, bamboo, all the weaving possible techniques of roofing, and then we understand everything that needs to happen in an ecosystem to have a raw material to dry it, to work it, and then to make it a shelter. We started as well falling in love with this idea of the communitary houses, the malocas, these epicenters of care in the territory. And what we were able to propose for this place was to come and weave a center with the local materials. We are weaving here thanks to the support of Aric Institute and Revisions Media that actually we're presenting. It's a sound video installation of a film that we collaborated on of the territories that we work in. That is the river Orinoco in the Amazonian Orinoquia region and the Vaupés River in the Amazon. And this video is showing what we've learned through these river learnings, river people, river communities. And when we started this proposal with Aric, a third partner came in, that is a Copenhagen construction studio, and they proposed to weave with algae and as well to weave with the fibers of the Venetian lagoon. So it's been pretty crazy. We've been for the last 2 weeks weaving a dome with the algae of an island called Lasso, which actually this technique is a vernacular roofing technique of northern Denmark. And building an epicenter of what we've always learned that is very present in all the malocas, that is this vortex of the fire, where we offer and we pray and we start getting contact back to our rituals and to giving thanks to life and life cycles. So we were able to do this iteration that brings the fibers of this area of the world and bring back the knowledge of all the elders that we work with about weaving and praying and coming together and honoring life in a sound video installation.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
So I think it's kind of already kind of remarkable to hear, you know, the scope and scale of all of these different participants, and super exciting to me as a curator to have all of you on stage. In addition to the people who are participating, we also have critics and curators who have their own relationship to Biennale. So Wael, as a golden, yep, you're up. You won the Golden Lion in, what was it, 2021, that's right. So actually I would love to hear your experience. You were at the Biennale yesterday. Can you share a little bit of your reflections? Like, you know, were you able to draw some conclusions? I'll give you my mic.
Hello, thanks for having me here. I didn't see much yesterday. I just managed to tour the Giardini and part of the Arsenale. So it might be unfair to make general statements, but I will. Anyway, So it's important to probably mention how I see the Venice Biennale. To me, the Venice Biennale has always been like the most easily cafe in Star Wars. Yeah, it's a place that brings creatures from all over the planets to engage in a dialogue and to discuss the urgent matters of our times. Yeah, that's very important. And I think, it was mentioned that what is architecture today? Who does it serve? It serves the people, it serves the communities, etc. And I think it's our moral responsibility today as architects to think of the urgent matters of our time and to address them somehow. In 2020-21, to me, when Hashim Sarkis raised the question how we will live together, to me, I addressed the relationship between us humans and planet Earth. It was focused on the climate. So today I ask again, what is the role of the 21st century architect? Of course, the climate is still urgent, but is it the only urgent matter that we have today? I hear a lot about CO2. I hear a lot about material research, etc. I do that. I do material research. I do CO2. I'm not trying to be critical towards anyone. I'm being critical towards myself today. Yeah, we live in very weird times, and how are we addressing those as architects? We need to probably rethink our priorities of today and the urgency that's needed. I mean, yesterday I felt as if our only enemy on the planet is CO2. And I was weirded out. I mean, seriously? CO2 is the least of our concerns today, yeah? Africa just 3% of CO2 and 17% of the world, right? We can learn from these parts of the world. But we really need to rethink what are the urgent matters of our time today. As architects, we're morally responsible. We're not only designers of space or creators of materials.
I would just add that I feel like we're all under enormous pressure. There's quite a lot of political pressure and anxiety that we feel, and I agree that we all have a responsibility to try to address these things, and in many ways we have to think about ourselves, all creative people, as the pressure gauge, right? As the gauge that allows the pressure to be released or controlled in some way, and so the spaces we inhabit are shelters. They're the places where we can maintain our ways of culture, we can maintain our ways of making, where we can be considerate of our ways of being. And I think that for us is such a priority, being architecture adjacent, in a sense, and working from the inside out. I think there's a lot to consider, rather than working from the outside in.
I would love to call on Beatrice Grenier, a curator based in Paris at the Fondation Cartier. You have an exhibition here, but you're also working on a new institution, and I'm curious to hear your reflections on everyone's work here today, and also Wael's larger statement. How do you respond?
Yes, I was going to respond first to Wael by suggesting, one of the important kind of questions for architecture, which we wanted to bring to the biennial this year, was really the role of the museum and what is the agency of architecture in rethinking, the role of the museum and cultural policy in the city. It's very beautiful. You just mentioned how architectures and how designing spaces shelters are the role of architects. And Jean Nouvel used a kind of beautiful way to describe the new institution that we're
we're working on, and which is opening across the Louvre in Paris later this year. He did call it a shelter of all possibilities. I thought it's an interesting question or way to describe the potential role of the museum vis-a-vis, especially, the shifting and increasingly vulnerable, stance of campuses in cities, and how should, museums work together across cities with other institutions to be these kinds of dynamic shelters for all kinds of possibilities for imagining new futures. The architectural device that Jean Nouvel designed for the new Fondation Cartier is very simple, 5 platforms, kinetic kind of architecture that can be completely reimagined with any new major exhibition project, which means that the premise of the project is really to reimagine the architecture of the museum itself. So we wanted to really kind of contribute this project to the Biennale as a way for the institution to become a pavilion again, to become a space of incubation for future ways of being for the museum and future ways of being of the city.
And Kieran, you were part of one of the David Chipperfield Biennale, whenever that was.
2012, yeah, feels like a long time ago.
What are your reflections on the show, but also what we've heard here this morning?
I think it's, there's wonderful projects to hear about, and just reflecting on briefly what the Biennale is for. I think there's been a kind of, since I've been coming here, a kind of rise in slickness and a rise in kind of presentation as a focus of what the Biennale, what being invited to the Biennale is about. And I'm really excited to hear about your project in Colombia. Eva, you're always so inspiring, sort of rethinking practices of design and materialities from different principles. That feels to me to be an extraordinary opportunity of a place like this. But it feels to me that the Biennale in the last few editions has oscillated between a somewhat American-influenced academic conversation and then a sort of return to buildings on some level, and never really being able to square that circle to the point that it feels like we're talking about two different professions or two different art forms. Like, are these the same thing? Why do we all turn up here? Obviously, working with David in 2012, we were part of the latter camp. David is a building-oriented, extraordinarily gifted architect of marshalling materials and space and so on. But the project that he set up and that we worked on together was trying to find deeper continuities. It wasn't trying to present a kind of a list of acceptable architects in a taste regime of David. It was the theme there, Common Ground, was an attempt to say, what are the deeper continuities of the profession of architecture, of the art form, that might lead us to be able to bridge a conversation between these apparently diverging tendencies. And now, sitting as I do in Helsinki, I've been in Helsinki a year running Amos Rex, beautiful art museum there, and I've been in Scandinavia now for 8 years. I'm sort of starting to feel like there's a need to re-find a kind of regional terroir in the conversation. Like the Nordic region, I'm so proud to be there. We just closed an exhibition with Larissa Sansour, the Palestinian film artist, where we were able to have conversations and programs that are not possible right now in Berlin, that are not possible maybe even arguably in London and maybe not in New York. To sit on a panel like this and not hear the most urgent conflicts of our time mentioned, the destruction of Gaza, the destruction of Ukraine. These are things that I think the Nordic region still can talk about with freedom and freedom of expression. And we aim to do that with the luxurious circumstances we have. Those luxurious circumstances are not just about great benefits for parents and lots of holiday. They're about a certain kind of commitment to freedom of expression. I suddenly think that that's unusually valuable and exciting to be a part of. So it'll be exciting to see in the Giardini this time,
my new countrymen, Finland, taking over the Nordic Pavilion and presenting dance performances around trans bodies in modernist cities. I'm really proud of that. I'm proud that that platform right next to the US Pavilion, which by the way also sounds beautiful, but right now in this political game we're a part of, that feels strong and it feels important. And so maybe a fragmenting, reducing some of the slickness that we've all got used to in recent editions and coming back to a really regional Biennale could be a good way forward.
Would any of the panelists like to respond to Kieran? Pass?
No, I think what's important today, and I think many of us teach, there's this kind of eco-anxiety among the young students, and I think it's very important it's almost a moral obligation to remain positive, and I think what better city than Venice to do that, because I mean this amazing city on the most improbable place, and in a swamp, building all these palaces. So I think we have to keep that believe in what we can do as humans. And I think that and I feel that in the Biennale, I mean, I didn't have much time yet with the opening of my own pavilion, but I feel there's a kind of positivity of I mean, the need is so urgent that the only thing we can do is come up with solutions. So I think that's really the obligation we have now.
I was thinking that the anxiety actually comes from thinking that we can have solutions sometimes. And I was listening about this idea of a shelter for many possibilities or for all possibilities. We actually talk about vessels for liminal dialogues, being a piece of craft, a dialogue with another piece of craft. And I think it requires a lot of humbleness from us now to be able to use architecture as a way of care, being a porch or being a museum, to create these epicenters of care that require new listening technologies, that we can actually pause ourselves to maybe listen to something that we haven't listened yet. And of course it's a different timeline, and of course it doesn't match with these languages. But I do think we can start making these manifestos of care stronger and of weaving social webs and cultural threads as the main idea of whatever we design. And it comes from rooting cultures, and it comes from creating engagement of collective processes to really for things to have a place to grow and to be taken care of.
We have a few minutes left, and I was wondering if Eva, you want to? Yeah.
I think situated knowledge. I mean, just hearing your voice, your speed, your tempo, the way in which we are changing. No, the discipline is not anymore what was in 2012, and I think that's really good. We have, I think, for the last 4 decades, been terribly distracted by an entire definition of architecture as a almost academic pursuit of self-referential conversations. And I think we all here accept that we have to listen, and we have to listen outside of our field. That in fact the real substance of what we are doing doesn't really exist anymore within our own disciplinary worlds. And I think that this question of situated knowledge and the way in which ancestral knowledge that is very much alive in traditions, in vernacular ways of understanding the relationships between humans and non-humans, is something that it would have been unthinkable to be discussed in a Venice Biennale 10 years ago, not even 20, just 10 years ago. I think it is fundamental and it is essential. And if something was good over the last few decades was the kind of an optimism and illusion that we were becoming all more inclusive, that we were becoming more plural, multicultural. And what I think that actually brought was this real expanding and breaking of the disciplinary walls and the anxieties that past generations put into the architectural profession, that now is not anymore about building or architecture as project. It's simply about how do we have an agency to contribute humbly to the ways in which we want to live together. And thinking about the methodologies by which we are getting there, by listening, by doing a series of future laboratories with communities that otherwise we would have never included in our processes, and many others, I think there is an important question to have about how do we do this work, and how do we teach it as educators, and what are the methods by which we are able to educate new generations to not repeat the same mistakes that we have produced. And for that, we need new spaces of references, new histories, either oral or written, or new books that, in fact, are not anymore written by the same figures that we actually still find in some of the syllabuses of schools across the world. We are representative of a very few and elite spaces. I have been teaching for the last 4 years in the Czech Republic, in Prague, where I have a professorship. And one of the issues that for me is urgent, and I don't know where we would find it at the Venice Biennale, and yet it is in every single room but never outspoken, is the matter of class. When we talk about architecture and class, mostly we say affordable housing, social housing, but we never talk about the rooted issues that in fact we are perpetuators of class differences over and over again. When we talk about museums and a shelter of possibilities, possibilities for who? For what bracket? And so I'm using this forum right now to talk about the now, the urgent, and the next. Because I think talking about class and framing architecture through class is probably, for me, one of the other urgent issues that has planetary implications, but we can also look at them within our own cities and neighborhoods.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, particularly to this conversation about the vernacular and tradition, I think also we've gotten to a point where we've understood, or we appreciate now, the importance of diversity and diversity of solutions and learning from tradition. Just to mention, in relation to the project that I'm showing here, I did a lot of research into the understanding of the market structure, which I'm speaking from the context of Africa, but for a lot of indigenous practices, this idea of convergence and community that have happened in the market was very important. And I found out something that I thought was very beautiful about how divinely important the market was. And within my culture, there is a saying, "Aye loja orunile," that the soul passes through the market on its way to the afterlife. And it shows how important this place of convergence is, So we think about it in the realm of humanity, but also this idea of spirituality, and how the idea of this place of convergence, irrespective of the timeline, irrespective of, if it was 100 years ago with a small village, and you think about the cityscape, this idea of community, convergence, and commerce has always been present. What can we learn from these periods of the past that can contribute to the solutions of today? It's not a direct translation, but so much has been erased by this idea of modernity and progress, and we really do need to also look back to go forward. Thank you.
I just wanted to add that, I think it's so important to step out of the academy. We were teaching for some time and actually teaching at the University of Arkansas, which is how we became acquainted with this possibility of being here with the U.S. Pavilion. And stepping out of the academy and understanding that innovation can happen anywhere. It sometimes doesn't have to be designed. It sometimes doesn't require a Western history. Sometimes it just needs to be acknowledged and supported. And I think, when we consider the G's Ben project, these women have been working for, over a century and only are now getting the kind of recognition that they deserve. And so, architecture as a space of possibilities, as a place where anyone can inhabit and activate, I think is really the most important direction we should be heading in.
Well, you are the incoming director of the Zaha Hadid Foundation, which is you have two hats on at the moment, right? Because coming up, you're moving to London, Zaha Hadid Foundation. How will you take anything from this Biennale forward? Like, what do you take from, like, what is the now of architecture from this show?
Yeah, well, I think actually what I'll probably take to answer your question is what we've been really fortunate to be able to do at my current role, which I'm very sad to leave, at the New Institute. I mean, we're talking about institutional practices a little bit, and also the Biennale as an institution, right? And, you know, Ava, things have changed a lot in the past, 10, 20, I think you said 30, 40 years, but also they haven't, right? Things change and they don't. And I think those of us who've maybe been around long enough have kind of heard very similar discussions happening over and over in recent decades. And I think the question is, we've sort of raised the awareness, we posed the questions, we've sort of deconstructed everything, we've sort of talked about rethinking everything from A to Z. But at what point do we start actually doing it? You start to feel like we're living a time of a decadence of words masking a poverty of action. And this is not to belittle all the amazing practitioners and activists and so on and so forth who are really out there doing stuff. But in these kinds of settings, we are we're sort of stuck in our shelter, to borrow this typology that's been brought up. And the question is, as institutions, are we, the idea of being more open, more engaging, more inclusive, et cetera, nonlinear narratives, recentering history, but we know. So, in what ways are we actually taking all these knowledges that we've been bringing together, all these discourses that we've been throwing out into the world? At what point do we start actually enacting them? Because when you look at institutions, they've changed remarkably little over the years, and it takes a few bold ones to actually try things out. Because in being these sort of cultural institutions, we do sort of occupy these third spaces that are neither government per se, nor the commercial private sector per se. I mean, everyone's different. But what we haven't done is we haven't capitalized on that opportunity to be able to take risks and actually do things that government and the commercial sector can't or won't. So this idea of a museum or institution as not a laboratory, we have enough labs, lots of ideas, lots of great research, but actually testing grounds for enacting speculations in which we create real world scenarios based on some of the ideas and propositions that we're constantly showing and talking about. And in doing so, we see what works, we see what doesn't. And perhaps more importantly, we actually make something real. If we're talking about change, history of change tells us that things always seem impossible, implausible, or ridiculous until they're actually real, and then suddenly they're obvious. But someone needs to take the first step, and in enacting some of these new imaginaries that we're drowning in, these wonderful new imaginaries, but we're drowning in them.
I don't think we are drowning in new imaginaries, actually. I think perhaps that was something that was happening many years ago. I think, in fact, we have a paralysis. New generations, they feel that there is not an imaginary, that the crises are so multiple that we are stuck with a capacity, a very limited capacity from institutions, from educational institutions, to actually really move through. So I don't think that there are enough imaginaries, and I think that actually a lot of the youth that I'm working with, they are making action in ways that I don't know what you mean by translating, but they do a lot of work with words, and they do a lot of work with, from digital means to physical encounters that have nothing to do with what we would consider to materialize them. I don't know if you're talking about buildings, but there is an entire new generation that is looking to be able to really break the anxiety that all these crises that we are talking about has generated, and that we don't necessarily have the historical language to break them through. So I want more institutions to be laboratories and to actually offer opportunities for people to really test, to think ideas in speculative ways, because otherwise we are like, from idea to action, as you are framing that dichotomy, it's it's something that is devaluing ideas. And I think ideas have incredible power. And we could talk about poets and Audre Lorde and many others that have used words to change ideas and mindsets. And I'm not saying that architecture should be words, but we can start in so many different ways to think that architecture is being built sometimes in a room like this. I believe what Beatrice has been doing is architectures of communities. And I don't think that she needs to move from, thought to action. I think this is action.
Yeah, I don't think we're disagreeing.
Okay. Okay.
Perfect.
Good. There were like 50 seconds left. I was like, we have to put some conflict. You wanted conflict.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to these sort of binary ways of thinking that the Dutch Pavilion is trying to sort of break through, it's not either or. It's not that you have ideas and knowledges versus actions and so on. You need both, right? But what I'm saying is that there's not a focus on the latter. And I think if you're talking about the anxieties of young people, then I think we absolutely should be, institutions should be places where these young people can sort of not only talk about their anxieties, but also respond to them in very real ways. Again, not just through thoughts, but also through actions. These should be platforms not just for ideas, not just for testing new formats for exhibition making, although that's important too. Again, it's not one or the other, but actually enacting whatever new imaginaries or vocabularies that might be.
Thank you, everybody. I think on the topic of institutions, I would just like to thank so much the SMAC for having us here. I think this is a very exciting new institution for Venice. We're so proud to be working with you. We have time for questions. But yeah, I would like to thank all of the panelists for your contributions, and we can open up the floor for some questions. So thank you all so much. Thank you.